Today on Strange Places, we discover an absolutely stunning abandoned house tucked into the countryside and concealed from the frantic routine of big city life, and hidden from the destructive eyes of vandals and thieves for almost 30 years. But what we discovered in this dresser changes everything.
June 1959. What in the hell? Oh, this is some serious shit.
A military communication from the late 50s that certainly did not belong in this house.
About they need to go to Pasadena in California for the ultimate assignment, as there might be a threat.
This is written in code, right? And it looks like someone was trying to decipher the code.
We may have stumbled upon the abandoned house of former KGB agents, former Soviet spies.
4, 3, 2, 1.
It's about our air defense system. That would be a very, very important piece of intelligence. This document would give the Soviet government an edge.
Is Max Power completely out of his mind, or did we just uncover a Cold War mystery?
Welcome to Strange Places, where we go places that most people wouldn't dare to venture. And I'm your host, Max Powell. Today on Strange Places, we are going to be checking out this ancient abandoned house in the countryside of New England. This house had many very old and very cool features. I've never seen a house like this completely untouched, completely unvandalized. Now, if you haven't already, please go down there right now. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, turn those notifications on. It really helps me out a lot. And here's the best part. You'll be able to see Strange Places videos the moment they come out. Just go down there right now. It will take you 5 seconds. Now we take you to the ancient abandoned house on Strange Places.
Upon entry, it became clear that parts of this house were decrepit and unstable.
Oh shoot, that means the floor is fine.
When I began to roam about the structure, I found this hilarious locking mechanism that was blocking our entry through the front door.
This crutch and that thing over this front door so no one can get in, but they left the back way totally open.
Hey, if it looks stupid but it works, it's not stupid. The rooms on the first floor were filled with many of the house's relics intact, some likely sitting in the same place they were left in when the home became abandoned all those years ago.
We have this stove here from a very, very long time ago. I don't think I've seen a stove from this specific era. Sometime between, my guess is 1910 and 1940, 1950.
Artifacts from many eras of the past were packed into the small kitchen.
Old playing cards. What's this? Oh, these are the presidents. John Tyler, Abe Lincoln, Andrew Johnson, Benjamin Harrison, Woodrow Wilson. It's president's cards. That's pretty cool. Guys, not too much in this room. I searched the place, looked around, see what was left, see if I could find anything interesting. What I found was this pacemaker. That pacemaker transmitter controls the functions of the pacemaker, which helps your heart beat properly. Let's see if it still works. It's interesting.
In a small closet, I found a multitude of trophies.
1975. This one does not have a date. Alright, we're gonna go upstairs. Oh, that's cool.
The master bedroom was the best preserved and most aesthetically pleasing room in the entire house. Many, many personal and religious items were scattered about.
This is interesting. This looks like Robert F. Kennedy and John F. Kennedy. JFK, as you know, was the president from 1960 to 1963. It's Robert F. Kennedy. This was the president's brother, and he was either a senator or a congressman. He was running for president. They killed him too, unfortunately.
One of the coolest rooms I've ever seen. Everything is untouched. The bed is still made. There's some weird looking doll here. There's this cool no trespassing sign. This no trespassing sign is in the house, so it's I mean, it's too late to tell us not to come here. Also, there's this gas lamp. I think this is kerosene. So that just shows you how old this place is. And these people still, at least for a while, used gas lamps instead of light bulbs and electricity. This doll is actually very creepy.
The room across the hall was similarly in great condition, but not nearly as remarkable. The attic was relatively extensive, however, I only had time to look through just a few boxes of neglected materials.
So this is from 1953. These people were giant supporters of Kennedy. There's a lot of Kennedy memorabilia here.
In another section of attic, I made a very interesting find.
What is this?
Hey, there's an old telephone in here. There might be a cool old telephone in here. I will be referencing this device later.
It says Federal Telephone and Telegraph. So this is a piece of a telephone.
By far, this was the room with the largest amount of and most interesting items.
Oh, what? I didn't even see that.
Yo, careful, because there's people outside.
That was so loud.
Yo, play it, bro.
Insert romantic Italian music here.
That's legendary, bro. Cool, that's a little bit creepy. Nope.
But what we found next
this?
turned this routine house exploration video into something much bigger.
June 1959.
The first document was a letter from the train line informing the recipient that they had unclaimed baggage left on one of this company's trains. But the second document was far more mysterious.
U.S. Army Training Center. Special orders. Extract. What in the hell? Colonel and Chief of Staff. What the hell? This is some serious.
A military communication that seemed very out of place.
So it says, so right here, it says it's signed by, I'll look up this colonel too. Mackin A. Hip, Colonel, Chief of Staff. Yo, this looks like it's written in some sort of military language. Here's what's weird, is that this is written in code, right? And it looks like someone was trying to decipher the code.
Dude, this is
I have
all
to figure out.
crazy stuff.
I have to figure out what this means.
Something about they need to go to Pasadena in California for the ultimate assignment, as there might be a threat. Oh no, that's really cool stuff.
I don't know,
That's a
it's
good
weird,
one.
man.
I'm gonna stuff it out even now. Yeah, I'm blurring it out on my.
I started piecing this theory together only hours after we left the house. When I told my friends about what I thought was happening here, I said, hey, I think that the people living here were Soviet spies. I think they were KGB. Look at all this evidence. They kind of looked at me weird, like I was out of my mind, and then and they were like, oh yeah, we're gonna get killed by the government, ha 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 ha, and I'm like, no, guys, I'm serious. So to many people out there, this next segment is probably going to sound something like this. The government installs listening devices in your toilet. Those audio files are being directly to Taylor Swift's music studio. That's where she's getting all her music from. Now, this is the second half of the theory. The Soviets said that the KGB stood for the Komitet Gostovstvennoy Bezopusnosti. But that's a lie. The KGB really stands for Krabs Gangbangs. Krabs obviously referring to Mr. Krabs, who sold cocaine to Pablo Escobar in the 1980s. All that money was funneled through the Krusty Krab. Once that money was washed, it went to two places, making the movie National Treasure and into Donald Trump's presidential campaign. You ready for this? This can only mean one thing. Donald Trump is Nicolas Cage. But if you'll just bear with me and listen to what I have to say before saying that I'm completely out of my mind, just listen to these three pieces of evidence that I've assembled. Now, these are my two weakest points. The radio headset, I'll go into that later, and there was a strange date on a calendar. So, I'm going to start with my strongest piece of evidence, which is the military communication, which is very odd if you really think about it. There was no evidence that anyone who lived in that house was connected to the military. Keep in mind, we went through everything. And it looks like this letter it doesn't even look like it was mailed. It honestly looked like it was ripped off of a clipboard and then folded up and kind of hidden. And then it was in an envelope that had nothing to do with a military document of any sort. It was kind of stuffed in there with some telegram from a train line. But that's not the most compelling evidence with this document. So I kept rereading this document, trying to figure out what it meant. It looks like the document is about soldiers being moved around from one base to another. This kind of seems insignificant. It's just a list of enlisted men being moved to all these bases. It looks like it's a communication between mid-level officers. Pretty insignificant, right? Well, as I was reading through the document, there are some things that stood out to me. So I couldn't really decipher this entire document. It was written in some sort of military code that I don't really understand. But a few words did stand out to me as I was analyzing this document. The first word that stood out to me was Nike. Now, this is referring to Project Nike. Project Nike was a U.S. military project aimed at developing and deploying ground-to-air missiles that were designed to defend major population centers and industrial centers from Soviet bombers and Soviet ballistic missiles. Then there was the word Hercules, which I didn't understand why it was next to Nike. I researched it later, and Hercules is the upgraded version of the Nike missile.
Nike Hercules, in more than 500 test and training firings, has demonstrated an amazing ability to seek out and destroy various targets from about 1,000 up to more than 150,000 feet in altitude. This intercept, altitude above 60,000 feet, target speed in excess of 1,500 miles per hour.
The first Nike missile was built in 1953, and the U.S. government continued to build Nike missile sites until 1962. In total, 265 Nike missile bases were built to counter the Soviet bomber and missile threat. So it is about our air defense systems. Now, if we go to the next paragraph, there's the word that says air def, which stands for aircraft defense. In the paragraph below that one, it has the word sky sweeper in parentheses. And this refers to the M51 Sky Sweeper anti-aircraft gun.
Artillery pieces are being augmented by remarkable new defense weapons. The first, a gun called the Sky Sweeper, is a radar-controlled, automatically fired rifle, which means certain destruction for any aircraft flying within its range.
Again, another form of air defense is mentioned in this document. On the back, there's a whole bunch of paragraphs which contain the word air def, which again is aircraft defense. So let's backtrack for 1 second and talk about the historical context. This was 1959. This was the height of the Cold War. The Cuban Missile Crisis occurred just 4 years later. Both sides were preparing for a nuclear war. Many people thought that this nuclear war between the United States and the Soviet Union was inevitable, and both sides were trying to gain an edge to win this war. Even though everyone probably would have lost because it was a nuclear war, both sides were still trying to gain an edge to try and win. Theoretically, in the opening phases of World War III, there would be a nuclear exchange between the United States and the Soviet Union. There would be other smaller nuclear exchanges between NATO allies, and China, depending on the situation. The nuclear exchange would include intercontinental ballistic missiles with nuclear warheads, ballistic missiles fired from submarines, which I don't know if those existed in 1959. And number 3, both countries would send their bombers with nuclear bombs. So the opening phases of this war, the most important part of the war, that would all be fought in the air, which means one of the key pieces of intelligence the Soviets would want is where are the United States' air defense systems? Because that would be a very, very important piece of intelligence to know where our anti-aircraft guns are and where our anti-ballistic missile, anti-aircraft missiles are. The location of our Nike missile bases and the location of our anti-aircraft guns wouldn't be top secret information. It would be relatively easy to obtain the locations of these defense systems, but the US military they didn't publish a list of where the hell the anti-aircraft cannons were. They just wouldn't do that. That means that a Soviet intelligence officer would need to gather information and find out exactly where all of our anti-aircraft guns and where all of our missiles are. And what better way to find where our missile defense systems are than intercepting a document that has a list of soldiers being sent to a whole bunch of different bases. It tells you right in the document where the base is, and it tells you what kind of weapons are there. So this document would give the Soviet government the locations of, I think, like 5 to 6 different bases in the United States. Now, we had 265 Nike missile bases in 1961. So knowing the location of 5 bases doesn't put a dent in knowing where all of them are. But of course, there would be other Soviet operatives and there would be other people intercepting a whole bunch of other different documents or going to these locations and, you know, looking at them using binoculars, whatever, to try and figure out where our defense systems were, what was there, and then they would be sent to the Soviet military and they would figure out how to best use this intelligence and how to plan better based on where our defense systems are. That document would be a very good piece of intelligence. Here's the other thing. We could have found a document, a military document, that could have been about anything. Like, it could have been about soldiers being sent or assigned to different destroyers or battleships. It could have been a naval communication. It could have been something about soldiers being sent in the infantry or a tank division. It could have been hundreds of things. But instead, it is literally a letter about the second most significant piece of information that you could have. The first most significant piece of information is, where are the ICBM silos? What are we going to hit? And where are the missiles going to come from? Where are the air bases? Where are the bomber bases? And where are the United States' ballistic missile silos? That would be number 1. Number 2 would be, where are their defenses? So when we send ballistic missiles and when we send bombers, we can know where their defenses are and plan around that or plan for it. A few of you might say, well, if the Soviets wanted to find out where your air defense installations were, they would send a satellite over the United States and take a whole bunch of pictures, beam them back, and study the photos and find out. But the first Soviet satellite that was capable of taking photos and bringing them back to Earth was the Zenit satellite. That wasn't deployed until 1960. So they had no way of knowing where our air defense installations were. They would have to have intelligence like this. The telephone that I found in the attic, the thing that I thought was a piece of an old telephone. I actually did some research on it, and that is not a telephone. It is a radio headset. Now, that could be there because the people who lived here were radio enthusiasts, ham radio or shortwave radio enthusiasts, like so many thousands of others in the US at this time. But it could also be evidence that the people living here were Soviet spies. This is how the KGB, and in fact, I think this is a universal technique that is still used today. American spies abroad, and certainly the Soviet Union, they would communicate through radios. So basically, if the Soviet Union wanted to send a message to one of their agents, there were no cell phones. They didn't want to send a letter because those could be intercepted. They didn't want to send it through any wired communications. All that could be intercepted and decoded. So this is why they used shortwave radio. The Soviets would broadcast messages, and they would send them. It would bounce off the atmosphere, the radio waves, and it could go anywhere in the United States if they turned to the right frequency. Now, the U.S. government could also be listening, but the way they communicated was, they're called number stations. And they still exist today. If you pick up the right radio, you can still tune into number stations today. And it's just people reading off random numbers in like a robotic voice. And it's kind of, people find it creepy.
39715. 39715.
That's how they talk to each other. The Soviet spies would have a packet of codes, and each number would equate to a letter or a symbol or a space. This packet, you could go to day X, look at the packet, and see what the codes were for the day. Tune in when you're supposed to get a message from the Soviet government, and then they'd listen to the numbers, and they'd be broadcasting the numbers. They would write the numbers down and use the code packet to decode the information. And it's pretty much undecodable. Like no one can take a whole bunch of random numbers and decode that unless, of course, you have the packet. So that's how the Soviet spies got their messages from Moscow. They used radios. So the fact that there's this military communication there and there's this radio headset, a little bit coincidental. Finally, the last date that we found. The last date that we found was July 1991. That was 5 months before the Soviet Union broke apart officially. The Soviet Union dissolved in late December of 1991. 5 months before that, they were beginning to fall apart. Actually, July 1991 was in the middle of this Soviet breakup and dissolution. If the Soviet government was beginning to fall apart, of course, they would want to recall their agents. That's when the Soviet Union started to fall apart, and it just happens to be the last date in the calendar. You know, it's a little bit weird. They could have abandoned the place in 1990, 1989, 1992, but no, it's literally 5 months before the Soviet Union fell apart. If you put that together with all this, it kind of starts to make sense a little bit. This is something that could actually be true, and I think it might be true, because, like I said, very odd. That's why I'm presenting you this conspiracy theory. We may have stumbled upon the abandoned house of former KGB agents. Former Soviet spies. That's pretty freaking cool. You know, there are definitely houses out there where Soviet spies lived, and a few of those have to be abandoned, and someone sooner or later is going to find the house where the Soviet spies lived. And we just happen to be those people. So that's why I think that the people living here were Soviet spies. Thank you for watching. I'm your host, Max Power. Hold on. I wonder who the hell that could be. Oh, it's a package. Amazon? I didn't order anything from Amazon. Why is it ringing? Oh, shit.
The American who foolishly gave away our secrets has been taken care of. No, I did not literally take care of him. You know what I mean. He's dead, Ivan. He's dead. I killed him with bomb. Boom. Dead. Is that what you want to hear? Okay. Good. Good. I'll be back in Moscow tomorrow morning. No? Why would you book me on Delta? They do not serve the vodka on Delta. I requested United, Ivan, you stupid human being. God.